see Madeline's doing the intro, and I'm going to share my screen.
Let's see if I can you guys see me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great.
Okay, everybody, welcome to today's session. My name is Madeline Babb, and I am the Executive Vice President of PreMedCC, a student-led organization established in the fall of 2021. Our goal as an organization was to create an online program for pre-medical students at community colleges and universities with the hope of guiding the next generation of diverse and inclusive physicians. We know how challenging finding guidance and mentorship can be, especially in the middle of a global pandemic. And while we advertise our organization as being for community college students, our events are open to anyone. We realize that finding guidance and mentorship in a pre-med journey can be especially challenging for first-generation pre-med students, people that lack the financial resources, or just those that don't know anyone in the medical field. One of the best parts about our events is that they are virtual, so you can do it from the comfort of your own home or wherever you are. We typically have events on most Fridays from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Pacific time, and on Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. If you aren't able to attend the event, all of our sessions are uploaded on our YouTube channel. Many of our sessions will end with a Q&A with our speakers. Any questions that you have can be put in the Q&A section on Zoom, and our team members will present them to the speaker. After you have attended our event, you can log on to our website and complete the quiz, which will contain questions pertaining to our session today. If you score 70% or higher on the quiz, you will be awarded a certificate to show that you have attended our session today. Students that attend all of our sessions this school year will receive a PreMedCC Scholar Award for all of the hours of mentorship they have completed. If you want to stay connected with our upcoming events or want to tell your pre-med friends that are struggling to get mentorship about PreMedCC, our social media accounts are all at PreMedCC. Thank you, and I'm going to hand it over to Mariah to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Madeline. Dr. White has been affiliated with Johns Hopkins University since 1994, first as Director of Undergraduate Admissions and then as the Assistant Dean for Admissions at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. In addition to his admissions position at the School of Medicine, he was also served as the Assistant Dean for Financial Aid. In addition to his current work overseeing the Hopkins MD Admissions Office, he serves as a voting faculty member on the MD Admissions Committee, sits on the Financial Aid Advisory Board at Hopkins, and on the MD/PhD Admissions Committee. From 2006 until 2012, Dr. White has served as the Associate Dean of Admissions at the University of Minnesota Medical School before returning to Johns Hopkins School of Medicine in 2012. Dr. White's professional career began at Yale University in the Office of Undergraduate Admissions, where he was an Assistant Director of Admissions for Yale College. He later served as an Associate Dean of Admissions at Hamilton College and as a Senior Associate Dean of Admissions at Colgate University. Dr. White received his bachelor's degree in American Studies from Yale University and his Juris Doctorate degree from Georgetown University Law Center. He has served as a member of the National Merit Corporation Scholarship Selection Committee, and he's a member of the Educational Testing Services Scholarship Review Committee. He currently serves as the chair of the Board of Trustees for the Seed School of Maryland, a statewide public boarding school, and he's the regional director of volunteer services for the annual Yale Day of Service for Yale alumni throughout Maryland and Virginia. He is a past president and co-founder of the Black Faculty and Staff Association of Johns Hopkins University and a past president of Hightower Scholarship Incorporated. His speaking engagements have included regional and national conferences on such topics as using social media and admissions, legal matters, and affirmative action, and using financial aid strategically. He has served as a consultant to a number of colleagues, universities, and medical schools on admissions matters, both within the U.S. and abroad.
Well, thank you very much, Mariah. That was amazing where you got all that information, but it's my pleasure to be here and to meet with the students who hopefully are signing in for this program. I think it's a great opportunity to learn, particularly those who might be in the community college stages of their careers, because we certainly see students who started at the community college and then progressed on to four-year institutions. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to join you all. So,
So yeah, so I would say people could start typing questions in the Q&A, and we will get started. This is your chance to ask any questions that you want. and you also have the ability to ask anonymously. Not that the speaker will be able to track you down, but you can ask him anonymously, and obviously if they're inappropriate, we will not ask the question, but if they are appropriate, we will. Yeah, so the first question is, can you take your pre-med requirements at community college and qualify for Johns Hopkins School of Medicine?
Absolutely. And while I'm representing Johns Hopkins, I certainly can speak in general about a number of other medical schools, but it really is up to you to find out at the individual level what each institution does. And certainly for students from California, that's an important question. And for many years at Hopkins, we did not accept community college credits for the prerequisites. And I was one of those people who really fought for our accepting those. And finally, maybe I'm going to say 6 years ago, I was able to convince our Education Policy and Curriculum Committee, of which I'm a member of, that it really made sense for a couple of reasons. One being that we do see students from all over the country, and the top state represented in terms of application, interesting enough, is California at Hopkins. And that's true for a lot of schools in the East. And I know a lot of students in California start out at the community college level. So to me, we were invalidating 2 years or more of the work that they were doing. So I thought it was really important that we recognize that not everyone has started at a 4-year institution. So that's number one. Number two, the reason there's students who choose community colleges because financially it makes sense. My own brother, who's educated also at Yale and University of Maryland, master's degrees and so forth, teaches at a community college, one of the leading ones in this area. So, and it wasn't for that reason that I thought it was important, but I know that some of his students are incredibly impressive and go on to four-year institutions. The reasons why they chose the community college is because it was affordable. And that's true for so many students. If you can at least diminish the cost of your four years of education, plus going on to medical school by starting out at a community college, I think that's a great idea. And we certainly have taken students from community colleges. And I have to tell you, Mariah mentioned that I worked in admissions at Yale. That's where I started. It will be 43 years ago this coming June. And I remember everyone who worked in the admissions office at Yale was responsible not only for admitting students into the freshman class, the first year class, but also transfer students. And we would often look far more favorably on that applicant who wanted to transfer from a 2-year institution than say someone who was applying to us from a school in, I'll say Cambridge, Massachusetts, without naming it, or schools in New York City or in parts of California. And that's because we knew that the transfer applicant from the 2-year institution had exhausted all the capabilities or their curriculum and so forth, and had to leave after 2 years. And why not take them? Because they were usually well prepared. Not everyone, but the students were certainly well prepared. So at Hopkins, we have the same philosophy. If we see students who did the first 2 years at a community college, that's fine. And we have no problems accepting those students.
And our next question kind of touches on that a little bit. The average STEM student stays at a community college for 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
How does Johns Hopkins look at students that have spent more than 2 years at a community college?
However long it takes for them to get their education. I mean, some people are working, and so they're not exactly a full-time student. So the 2-year model doesn't work for someone who's working 40 hours a week as well, or has a family in some cases. Not everyone is 21 or 20 or 19 for that matter in community college. I've accepted students who may have, in fact, I have someone right now who's on the waiting list, but he's 35 years old, and he's attended a couple of community colleges before actually getting his degree. And he has a very good shot of getting in. There's no question. So we're not holding people to the 2 years, or even when they're in someone who started at 4-year college. If it takes you 5 years, fine. If it takes you 6 years, we know that at certain institutions, it's nearly impossible to get into required courses. You know, you may start with the large survey courses. I'll talk about the large lectures. That's what I'm speaking of. But once you get into the smaller, more seminar type classes, there can be waiting lists, you know, to get in those. And so you may have to wait until the next year when you're given priorities, since you may have already spent 2-3 years there. So we don't think in terms of everyone has to be in and out in 4 years, or 2 years for that matter. Other questions?
Kennedy?
Yes,
Oops.
Sorry. It says, how important is it to have research experience in order to apply?
If you're applying to the MD degree at Hopkins, it's not a requirement. Now, having said that, I'll be honest, 97%, 99% of the students who apply to Hopkins, even in the MD program, have had research. But the degree of research, the length and so will vary depending on the student and depending on the institution. Some may have a few hours of research working with a professor. And by the way, it could be wet lab, it can be, you know, bench, whatever. It doesn't have to be what everyone thinks of as working with, you know, pipettes and so forth and animals and so forth. But just exposure to research, because it indicates that this is someone who is willing to step outside the classroom to get additional knowledge, perhaps get accustomed to failure, because if you do research projects, I mean, yes, I was a history and literature major essentially, but I also worked in engineering firms doing research for those firms when I was in college, you know, so, and got offers from firms in engineering, but I'm more interested in literature. So, but for students who are interested in medical school, I think it can help. It is not a requirement for MD programs. Where is it a requirement though? For any MD, PhD program, you have to have research because that's what you're going to be doing as part of your 7, probably 8 years of education, 4 years in the MD track, 4 years or more in the MD, PhD track. And you're going to work in a lab eventually. So the students who do MD, PhD, in fact, as Mariah was saying, I'm on that committee. I vote as well for that committee to make sure that they truly have an interest in patient care, the MD side of it. But I also respect the fact that they have to have significant interest in research for the PhD side. So we want to make sure that you know what you're getting into. So it's incredibly important to have significant research. And if you don't have it, you're not, you know, few people are going to have it at the community college. They may get significant research once they transfer to a 4-year institution. But if that doesn't work, there are other ways. For instance, the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, has a terrific 1 to 2 year program called the Intramural Training Fellowship, or IRTA is the acronym they use, intramural training essentially. And their main campus, of course, is in Bethesda, Maryland, but it depends on where the person is based, but you can do research. Even in Baltimore, we have students who are affiliated with NIH and then do research at Hopkins, essentially for NIH. But most of them will be in NIH. And what's interesting about that experience is not only are you getting research experience, but also some clinical exposure. So it's a great training program. And I see it was just in the chat. Excellent. I'm glad you did that. If you're interested in mental health, they have a division for that. If you're interested in infectious disease, so just about everything. And many of those students go on into MD programs, but a fair number do MD, PhD, and some do PhD programs as well.
The next question is, how does Johns Hopkins School of Medicine view extra science coursework that was taken at a community college after graduating from a 4-year college?
If when you say extra, meaning beyond the prerequisites, that's fine. Or if someone hasn't had the prerequisites and doesn't want to do a formal post-baccalaureate program, but needs to satisfy some of the prereqs, we will accept them from community colleges. We have a couple of people in the class now who had amazing records, but they hadn't really been considered pre-med. And one man I can think of, he's probably in his second or third year now. Actually, yeah, second year. He was a PhD, but not in the sciences that we require. So he had to go back and fulfill that. And where did he do it? At a community college. You know, it worked for him. So.
Our next question is, how does Johns Hopkins School of Medicine view I apologize.
Oh, no problem.
We just read that one. Let me double. Okay. So the next question is, how much is the MCAT weighted during admissions, especially if you're applying to the MD PhD program?
Right. Well, that's interesting. I would say, first of all, both programs really do look at you holistically. There is no one factor that is most important. I've had students who we've accepted who had, less than average academic records, but it's because the entire spectrum was considered, and some of these were, slow, or no, not slow, but late developers academically, and then caught the bug and just did amazingly well. I'm not going to tell you averages, but I've seen students whose averages you would be shocked at, who've gotten in not just the Hopkins, but other amazing institutions, number one. We really do consider everything holistically. But having said that, the MCAT is an important part of it. Otherwise, we wouldn't require it. And I will tell you, for about 20 years at Hopkins, we did not require the MCAT. You could apply to us with your SATs or your ACT or GREs or GMATs. You guys were born too late, sorry. But to be an AMCAS school, the American Medical College Admissions Service, we are required to require the MCAT. So it is the factor. I was just on a panel 2 days ago with another medical school, and this person said that they've done some studies, and students who get a 505, and students who get a 520 do equally as well, but it really comes down to their academic record as well, you see. So that's why I say it's holistic. So if someone has a less than stellar MCAT score, well, how did they do in the academic area? And did they take demanding courses? And if they've done that, then they have a shot. They really do. And then the fact is, we look at your clinical experiences, perhaps research. What do your faculty say about you? So these are all important considerations, and not just the MCAT score. Now, I know I've rejected students with 4.0s and 527. That's 100th percentile. Why? Because they had no clinical experience. That's what we really want to see on the MD side. On the MD PhD side, they are really interested in your research, and they're not going to learn a lot about your research from an MCAT score or even from your GPA necessarily. It's what you're doing. There are some amazing students who have already been published because they've taken a couple of years off and they're a first author in a publication. And when we're discussing them at the MD PhD meeting, we're like, this is someone who's going to be a leader in the field. And we are interested in leaders of medicine and in research at Hopkins. So, I'm not saying that the MCAT isn't important, it is, but it's not the only consideration.
The next question that was asked is if you could define more formally, I guess, clinical experience, and also how clinical experience has been impacted with COVID.
Two good questions, and I will tell you, let me answer the first one. Clinical exposure is patient exposure, okay, interaction. And so it depends where you are in your career as a student. Generally, most people don't get significant experience in their first year, sometimes even the first 2 years. So they will shadow. But shadowing should be an introduction. It shouldn't be the sum of your clinical experiences, because it doesn't say enough about what you're learning. It's what you're observing, which is important because you are learning something, but we want you to have some interaction with patients. We want you to engage with patients at some point, and you can't always get that just from shadowing. Clinical can be defined as working in the medical arena. So you may have to be certified depending on what it is you're doing. EMT, EMS, emergency medical services, or technician. Depends on the state, it seems. Some people become CNA, certified nursing assistant. Some become certified as phlebotomists. That's great. There are other ways to get clinical experience as a scribe. You're following a doctor as she is working with a patient and describing what's going on. You are scribing what is taking place and learning from that, hopefully. Some people do it as patient navigators. Clinical research coordinator. It sounds like it's all research. It's not. You're actually trying to find patients for research and interviewing them as part of that. So it is probably more patient experience than you'd think, or clinical experience than you think, and less research. The other folks are doing the research, but some will, if they, depending on how long they stay, may progress to the next stage. I've seen people who worked as in the emergency room at hospitals. Again, sometimes it requires being certified, but there are so many ways of getting clinical experience, and the longer you do it, the more your knowledge base will be, and that's what we're interested in. Can you demonstrate your understanding of patient care, or talk about it, if not in the personal statement? And that's really important. And I don't know if the question will come up later, but I sometimes do workshops on personal statements. If I don't see anything there that says, and this patient X, Y, Z, and what took place, I'm wondering, why do you want to work with a patient? And you don't seem to recognize that it's all about you. So that's really important. Now, I know that, let's go backwards to March 2020. A lot of clinical experiences were canceled, and we were told that you shouldn't look for any clinical exposure from applicants. Well, that turned out to be a somewhat inaccurate statement, because again, I'm going to speak about Hopkins, but the kind of student who applies to Hopkins had already been getting some clinical exposure. And so the sudden cessation of that didn't hurt our applicants. Furthermore, I saw students who by July of 2020 were able to get engaged once again when the world sort of opened up again, once we knew how it should be handled in the hospitals. I remember I had a couple of appointments canceled. I'm of an age where I had a cataract, and so when I went to see my ophthalmologist, and he and I are talking, and then I hadn't asked him anything, and he's still talking. Turns out he was doing a virtual scribing session with someone. So he had something on his eyeglasses, and the person who was scribing for him was able to follow everything. So, that was almost 2 years ago. Since then, it has definitely opened up. Am I seeing 800, 1,000 hours of something? Not as much anymore, but I still see it, believe it or not. But it's certainly, people have to have enough experience that they can write about it knowledgeably. And then if they get to the interview, talk about what they're learning from their clinical experiences. So it's important still to have it, even in the age of COVID.
The next question is, what do you look for in a medical school applicant?
Well, the number one thing we look for is an interest in patient care. And, you have to have demonstrated that, possibly through your clinical experiences, but also through your leadership. We think we're developing future doctors who are going to be leaders of medicine. So we look for involvement, service, and if possible, leadership. We don't require it, of course, but many of our students have it. And many of the best students typically have had some role in terms of leadership. So that's important. We look for people who are able to interact with individuals from all kinds of backgrounds. You know, there are at least 15, I'll say 15 competencies, interpersonal and intrapersonal competencies that the AAMC, the Association of American Medical Colleges, came up with probably about 15 years ago. And one of those is cultural competency. And we're in East Baltimore, which is a predominantly Black section of Baltimore, but also a Hispanic section as well, although it's a smaller population. And it's important that even though you're going to see patients from all over the world, you know, who come there for not just secondary care, but also tertiary care, but we are where people go for primary care as well, you know, in emergency medicine. And so your patients who you're going to interact with, not just in your third and fourth year, but also in your first, second year, we want to make sure you have some clinical exposure before you do your actual rotations. They're going to come from all kinds of backgrounds, and you have to be comfortable with that. So we look for that in individuals, and we especially look for, and this comes up repeatedly when I do a PowerPoint presentation, teamwork. People are accustomed to being a part of a team. And being a part of a team means not necessarily just being the leader of the team, but working well with other members of the team, interacting with the other doctors, the technicians, the nurses, the social worker, the nutritionist, the pharmacist, the patient, and the patient's family. If the patient is unable to communicate, certainly their family members. I, occasionally will go on grand rounds, and I've done it for cardiology, and it's amazing the teams that are involved, and includes medical students. So we want people to be comfortable in that world of being part of a team. And so it doesn't mean being on an athletic team. Before you all signed in, we were talking about my experience as a baseball player, and I've played other sports as well, men's field hockey, men's crew, and so forth. Sure, that's great, but I'm also talking about being on the yearbook, okay, being in a singing group, or being in the chess club. Not that I was, but some people are great who've done that. So anything that will give us a sense of how to share with others, frankly.
And our next question is, what programs or opportunities makes Johns Hopkins unique from other medical schools?
Wow, that's a tough question. Hopkins has been around for about 127, 128 years as a medical school. And when the Flexner report came out in about 1910, 1911, the report was to look at medical schools in terms of which schools were doing it right and which could improve. And schools like Harvard and Hopkins, of course, were said to do it right. And the reason why is we were one of the first schools to actually have prerequisites for medical school, basic things you needed to know. We were one of the schools that actually the school where the term rounding was developed, in terms of the clinical rotations and going on rounds and grand rounds. So thank you, Jubin. So and there are some schools that went out of business as a result of that. Our curriculum, we have a great curriculum, but it isn't static. We know that medical care has changed. Hopkins does not sit back at any time, and they don't allow any of us to sit back and say, aren't we great? You just don't do that at Hopkins. If you did, you don't last. And I've been with the medical school and the university for 22 years out of the last 28 years. And I can tell you, everyone's always assessing how can we improve things. And so when about 15 years ago, even with a great curriculum, they thought, all right, but medical care has changed. What can we be doing better? And we realized that healthcare disparities were not as integral in our curriculum as it could have been. Now you hear everyone talk about healthcare disparities. We started looking at that 15, 17 years ago and gradually introduced it. It's fully integrated in throughout all 4 years of our curriculum, weaving together not just medicine and science, but also social sciences and public health. Right after your orientation, which is a 3-day orientation, you'll have a what we call intersession, which will focus on healthcare disparities. We look at social determinants of disease. You know, you are going to learn disease, but what you're also going to learn, there are certain factors in certain communities that affect disease, such as, obesity and hypertension and so forth, because of living in food deserts and so forth. So we want our students to understand that. They're going to be surgeons, they're going to be oncologists, but they're all going to have to learn about how disease can be impacted because of where you live. So I think the fact that Hopkins is constantly in motion in terms of our learning is one of the things. The other thing I would tell you, again, I said it's not required, but everybody at Hopkins does research, and it's so easy to fall into research. It becomes second nature for people to want to do research. And in order, not everyone has had deep, significant research, but all of our students, particularly at the end of their first year, or the first year students exclusively have the chance to do up to 8 to 10 weeks of research over the summer with Dean's grants, which we will fund. Many of those departments then say, I want to keep this student with me for the next year, 2 years. So the mentoring is amazing there. When I first came to the medical school, which was 22 years ago this summer, I learned from the faculty that they view our students as the next generation, and they treat them as junior faculty members already. They are grooming them to succeed. And so the mentoring there is amazing. So that's the other thing that helps stand out. The facilities are amazing. Those 2 hospitals behind me are the 2 newest ones on the Baltimore campus. We have several other campuses. It's 1 million square feet in just those 2 buildings. All the rooms are private patient rooms, including in the NICU. And the NICU rooms are large enough so that babies are there for treatment, obviously very ill. Parents can stay in the rooms with them. That's how large they are. So we want people to be as comfortable as possible in a very difficult time in their life, or whatever their age. So it's just an amazing facility. The research that's being done there is just first class. So it's a great institution. It really is.
The next question that we had was, what are the prerequisites for Hopkins Med to be considered a pre-med student?
Oh, they're pretty easy. Go to our website, www.hopkinsmedicine.org/admissions/MD. But basically, we require a year of biology with lab, a year of general college level chemistry with lab, 1 semester of organic chemistry with lab, 1 semester or 3 credits of biochemistry, lab not required, 1 year of physics with lab, minimum of 6 credits in calculus and or statistics, and any kind of statistics, and 24 credits in the humanities or social and or behavioral sciences, or can be from all 3 of those areas. And then 2 of the courses within those 24 credits must be writing intensive, which I define very broadly, anything that requires you to write a lot, but they have to come from within the humanities, social and or behavioral sciences. Now, having said all that, we accept AP credits, advanced placement credits, if they have been accepted by your undergraduate institution, and that could be your community college, and are on the transcript. And then when you transfer to the 4-year institution, you're given credit for those as well, then we will recognize those credits. If you may have gone to a school that has IB, an International Baccalaureate program. We will accept the IB credits if if you have 5s and 6s, 7s on the higher levels that were accepted by your undergraduate institution. We do not accept CLEP. It's living experience, experiential learning. We don't accept CLEP credits at all, but we do accept AP credits, IB credits, community college credits, and online courses as well. We didn't used to prior to the pandemic, but it became sort of necessary. And we'll accept pass-fail, but I encourage people to be truly competitive. If your school is now back to giving letter grades, which most are, it really behooves you to get a letter grade, because the way the MCAT transcript calculates your grade point average, your GPA, you could actually end up in a slightly lower GPA if you take too many pass-fail courses, because the total number is the same being divided by a smaller number of actual course, just the total number of courses is the same. So it can result in just a slightly lower GPA for some people, not all, just for some. But so those are the basic requirements. We also require, obviously, the MCAT, the Medical College Admissions Test. There are 4 components of that test. All are important, including the CARS, the Critical Analysis and Reasoning score. If you overlook that, you're doing yourself a disservice, because one of the things we look for, not just written communication, but also oral communication. When you're on your rotations, you have to communicate with the other medical students, the residents, the doctors, and the patients. So that's important. You have to write quite a bit in medical school, and so that's going to be important to you as well. So the CARS is incredibly important if you can't do well on that. Okay.
The next question is, what are some extracurriculars that enhance our application as CC students?
CT meaning community college, or no?
Yes.
I'm sorry. CC. Oh, okay. Well, I see students who start at the community college level who still get involved in student government. Remember, I said leadership's important. Student government, being involved in any type of organization, having work experience. We're looking for balance. I know you're going to say, well, no one can do all those things. You'd be surprised. I mean, there were 52,000 people who applied to medical school this year. I'm sure a lot of them had those kinds of, not just our medical school, in general, all medical schools. And we had about 6,500 people apply, so for a class of 120. So we look for individuals who have some balance in their lives, and that that shouldn't just start once you get to a 4-year institution. It should be something you've already been involved in as a community college student, working with student organizations. It's great. It could be literary organizations. We have a literary magazine at the medical school, scientific magazines run by the students, volunteer groups. Those are the same type of things you can do as an undergraduate.
And our next question is, do you look for diversity in majors, or do majors need to be science related?
Oh my goodness. No, they do not have to be science major. In fact, where I went to college 100 years ago, there was no such thing as a pre-med major. Pre-med was more of a state of mind, meaning you knew you wanted to go to medical school, you had to focus on doing well and getting, certainly taking the prerequisites, but we don't care what your major is. I think a fair percentage of our students typically were in the biological sciences, but we see students who are engineering majors, economics majors. There are students who know from the age of 7 on they want to be doctors. Bless those students, right? But some people don't come to that realization until later in life, even after college. But even when you're in college, a major, you should focus on what interests you, all right? Now, keep in mind, this is an American history and literature person telling you this, and who went and got a Juris Doctorate, right? And works at a medical school. and worked for an engineering firm and offered jobs by engineering firms. Why? Because I could do technical writing. We want you to do what interests you, what excites you. If you know you want to go to medical school, then focus on the prerequisites. And there are fairly basic prerequisites out there. I named some of them: biology, chemistry, physics, biochemistry, right? And then there are some schools that say, we don't have prerequisites. University of Pennsylvania, you ever hear of it? It's one of the top schools in the country. They don't have prereqs. They don't have them. They say, you all have them, which is true. So we just want to make sure the student is competent in these areas, okay? And you can demonstrate that competency by doing well on the MCAT. We have prerequisites. That's how we feel about it, okay? Some say we have competencies, some say we suggest, whatever, okay? But major in whatever excites you. Now, let's say you're a career changer. You know, this may come up later, but you had no idea. And you didn't take the prerequisites. And that's the person, Mariah, who goes back after they've graduated from a four-year institution and says, I want to be a medical student. I realize that. I want to go to medical school. I want to be a doctor. No one wants to be a medical student, but I want to be a doctor, you know? So those folks can go back and do a formal post-baccalaureate program, right? Particularly if they didn't take any of the prereqs, that's called a career changer post-baccalaureate or post-bac. But then there are some who did take some of the science courses and maybe didn't do well as an undergraduate. Then they go to an academic enhancement post-baccalaureate program. Generally, the career changers are going to get a certificate, okay? The academic enhancers oftentimes get a master's, so they call them special master's degrees. A number of places have them. George Washington, Georgetown has a combined program. Georgetown has numerous programs. Boston University, they have one of the oldest special master's programs. Northwestern University, I'm pretty sure, has one. I mean, they're all over the place. West Virginia University, so forth. Yeah. But I would say you can't afford some of these programs because they are not inexpensive. And you want to go to medical school, you want to be a doctor. What should you do? Go to community college. Take the courses that you can. Now, it may require, after a certain level, if they don't offer biochemistry, you may have to take that at a four-year institution. But take it as a special student. You don't have to get a second degree. No one's asking you to get another bachelor's degree. But you can demonstrate that you're interested and you can handle the sciences. But you don't have to have been a science major to do that. We don't say you must be a science major. Okay.
The next question says, I am currently not a community college student. Rather, I am in a PhD program. I plan to start med school right from that. Are there any special requirements for people like me? And would I need to justify why I want to continue in medicine and not as a PhD student?
Well, you know, there are no special requirements. That's the easy part. The hard part is why medicine. Particularly if you're just completing a PhD, we might want to know, why are you switching after spending, I'm sure, a few years in a PhD. Now, if your plan all along was to do a PhD and an MD and you just reversed it instead of getting MD, PhD, or doing a combined program. But if you're doing a PhD, you really have to demonstrate your interest in patient care and not just in lab work, you know. And you can say, depending on what the PhD is in, I know that what I'm doing in the lab is going to benefit from my interaction with patients, and vice versa, you know. So, it goes both ways. So I think it can be really great to get a PhD. But we're not overrun by PhDs in the applicant pool. Probably about 10 to 12, 13% of our incoming students have an advanced degree, but only a handful of those are PhDs. The rest typically are masters, usually in PHs or masters in science and so forth. But the hard part is just to make sure the institution knows that you're doing it because, yes, you started in a PhD program, but you realize it's going to really benefit you to get an MD. And oh yeah, Bachelor's, which is at Columbia University. It looks like they have a PhD to MD program. Now I've taken PhDs from our own program because again, they've been able to convince us, yeah, this makes complete sense. We just admitted a PhD not too long ago, a few months ago, from a school out east, who was able to really convince the admissions committee it makes complete sense for him to do this. And it really depends on the area of medicine you want to go into and how they might tie into your research work. At places like Columbia and Hopkins are natural for someone who's already had a PhD, frankly. But the one thing I will be honest with, because this comes up, from time to time, people ask me, will it give them an advantage in our process? And I have to argue that it does not. And why is that? Because most of the applicants we see are either in their senior year or been out a year or two doing other things. And I don't want them to be disadvantaged in our process. And I don't want them to feel that they have to get another degree before they can set foot on our campus. All they have to do is say, this is what I did as an undergraduate. This is why I want to go to medical school. This is what I've done in the interim if they've taken a year or two off. I see people who've done AmeriCorps, Teach for America, Peace Corps, City Year. We see a number of students who've done City Year. And occasionally we see people who work in industry. That's fine too. But it all comes back to why medicine? Why do you want to be a doctor?
The next question is, how does Johns Hopkins review MCAT retakes?
Well, hopefully you don't have to retake it too many times. My worst case was someone who took it about 12, 13 times. And that's just, I know, yes, right. And meanwhile, this was not over a 2 or 3 year period, but over a multi-year period. And one thing you have to know is that some schools will not accept scores that are more than 3 years old or 4 years old. Some of you even say 2 years. So you have to be careful in terms of weighting. But this person just couldn't get it right. And at some point, the real score was in it, right? If you take it 10 times and the score hasn't really changed much by 1 or 2, then that's your real score. You do develop some familiarity after a while with the test. So, but having said all that, we will take the highest score from a single administration. So we don't super score. You can't take the biological, biochemistry from one section and then the cars from another section and then the psychology and sociological foundations of behavior from another section. We don't do that. It has to be your composite score. It's the highest from a single test date. But now, if you take it 2 times, that's not unusual in this day and age. Fine. If you take a 3rd time, I just hope you did much better. If you have to take it a 3rd time. If you start taking it 4 and 5 times, we think you're a little obsessive at that point. I'll be honest, but there still may be a good reason for that. I have yet to hear one, but there could be a good reason for that. Now the test changed a few years ago, so that required some people to take it a couple of times when it migrated to the 3-point scale instead of 2-point scale, and from 0 to 45 to 478 to 528 is the new test range. So that happened in 2015. So we saw people who had taken both, actually, the old score and the new score, the old scale and the new scale.
Can you tell them that you see all the scores, but also not to take the first exam as a practice exam?
Oh my goodness, yes. Study. Be ready. Take the first exam so that you do well enough, you won't have to take it a 2nd time, right? I mean, shouldn't that be your goal? Yeah, no one wants to take it a 2nd time. Now, if it happens, fine, but you shouldn't go in thinking, well, I just want to see what it's like. Some people are so unnerved by that first test, they don't always improve on the 2nd go round. okay? And as Juven said, we see all your scores. We do see them all, but we will use the most recent one. I saw, but I had someone who was just admitted her first score was maybe a 507. Not a terrible score, but she chose to retake it and got a 517, which is markedly better. And she was a good student as well. And so we did accept her with the 517. That's what's going to be reported when we turn it in. But her first score was a 507. And I'm sure she was expecting to do better than that. I know where she did her undergrad, and I know how the students typically do at her undergrad. But she did not do as well as she wanted to, perhaps. But you shouldn't go in thinking, I just wanted to see what it's like. Take a practice exam repeatedly. But you know what? The other thing is sometimes the practice exam scores aren't exactly what you think they're going to be because the conditions aren't the same, Yeah, so some people say, oh, but my score was showing a 520 and I got a 508. Well, you got a 508. I can't say you were leaning towards a 520 in the practice, but that's not the actual score that we will see. It's the 508. So in some cases, those people will retake it. Some they don't. And that's okay as long as they apply to a variety of medical schools. Okay. So where, depending on the combination of grades, courses, and the MCAT scores will give the school some assurances that you can do the work. I've taken students with lower MCAT scores because I know how well they did at a demanding institution.
And our next question is, how does Hopkins assess a candidate who has a misdemeanor on their record that is over 10 years old versus a candidate who has received a pardon for the same record? In other words, yeah.
No, go on, please. I'm sorry.
Is it worth the additional time to obtain a pardon, or is applying with a 10-year-old misdemeanor not substantially?
That's a tough question. Excuse me, 1 second. A little dryness in my throat. The AMCAS application will ask you about have you ever had a misdemeanor or a felony? We will ask you that as well on the secondary application. Okay, answer truthfully. I don't say, well, this student got a misdemeanor, only got a misdemeanor, this one got a felony. I'm looking at the individual. When was it? And the seriousness of it. Some of them are like, that's nothing. Because depending on the state, for instance, speeding tickets are misdemeanors. Speeding tickets, I would have gotten in real trouble, I won't tell. But we're not going to hold that against you. A felony can be a problem because some states you can't get licensed to practice. Okay, regardless, you want to answer truthfully. Same thing as if there's been a report, in terms of behavior at your college. Answer that truthfully, because sometimes your schools will do it anyway. They've had some fines for drunken behavior or loud music or whatever. You have to answer it truthfully. I'm not 100% sure if it's all medical schools, but my guess is it is require criminal background checks. Not once you're admitted, we won't do that then. But once you indicate this is where I'm going to attend the medical school. So we will send these out in May or June, probably June, to applicants. We conduct our own. The AAMC has their own criminal background thing that they do, but we do ours, which we think is more thorough. And it's CBI, but we will do our own CBI for Hopkins, which is very similar to one for employees. And the reason why you have it is, look, you're going to be working with patients. We want to make sure that there aren't some serious issues to come up. And if there is a hit, that's what they call a hit during the CBI, it's not an automatic disqualification. We give you an opportunity to explain what the CBI was, what the hit was. Sometimes people completely forgot, like Oh, I didn't realize that a speeding ticket was a misdemeanor. Seriously. If it's very, very serious, I don't know, because we haven't had that. I can say that, but I know one of the reasons these came about was someone who had committed a really serious crime. The medical school knew nothing about it. The guy gets into medical school and then commits another even more heinous crime as a medical student. And then all these things came out about his past. So that, now I'm going back a number of years, but it is kind of important now. But be honest.
The next question is, does Hopkins curriculum have a more lecture-based curriculum or a more problem-based curriculum?
It's a little bit of both. When we restructure the curriculum, you'll have some lectures, East Hall and West Hall, but you'll see that our students are assigned to these small groups, and they have these modules, and you'll be working in fairly small groups.
The next question is, are there differences between how out-of-state versus in-state student applications are reviewed for Johns Hopkins?
No, not at all. Not at all. We're a private institution, so we don't look at state of residence at all. I mean, remember I said the #1 state in terms of applications is California. I think they're probably #1 in terms of representation as well. They typically are California, New York, Florida, Texas for us, and to a lesser extent, Maryland. We're a private school, so we don't have residency requirements. We accept international students. I know that question hasn't come up. We will accept a DACA student, and as a private institution, we can fund international students and DACA students, but it is with our own resources. Okay.
And our next question is, how does Hopkins view courses taken at colleges outside of the United States?
Good question. Well, glad someone asked that question. That comes up time to time. We have no problem. Okay, we accept courses, we accept degrees from outside the US. Now, here's the wrinkle. Outside the US and Canada, the double AMC, which you've heard me mention several times, will not standardize or calculate your GPA. They'll show the courses and they may even show the grades, but because the systems can be very, very different, they will not recalculate or allow you to calculate the GPA. But again, they'll, you still can submit your transcript to them. It's just they won't do anything with it. Now, some schools will ask also, if it's a foreign language institution, will ask for a WES, World Educational Services transcript, WES, and there are others out there too. Hopkins will say if your language of study was not primarily in English, will require the TOEFL or the ILET, I think it is. I've rarely seen students have to submit either of those though. But we do accept foreign transcripts and foreign coursework and foreign prerequisites, more importantly, so you don't have to repeat them. But we will also tell you, if your degree, regardless of your citizenship, was obtained abroad, outside the US or Canada, you must have up to a year, sometimes less, sometimes a little more, of supplemental education in the US. Not a degree, didn't say that, not even a certificate, but taking courses like at a community college, or as a visiting student at a four-year institution. So we can see two things, the grades you would earn in the US and whether your preparation was indeed adequate for you to be prepared for a school like Hopkins. And I'm not just talking about grades, I'm talking about the methodology and everything. One reason why we don't accept, someone could go to Cambridge University, pretty well known, right? University of Cambridge, Oxford, pretty well known, not bad places, right? If that's where their bachelor's degree is from, we will not accept we'll accept the degree and the coursework. They still are required to do up to a year in the US because their GPA won't be calculated. It will, it shows up as 0.0, nobody wants that, right? And so we'll see students who will take a few courses in the US as a visiting student somewhere, and let's say you did a junior year abroad in the US, reverse junior year, that will suffice actually, because you still have a year's worth of work in the US. But typically some schools will say, oh, we don't take, international students. Some, you'll have to look at which ones done. They tend to be more of the state institutions. But we have no problem with foreign degrees as long as you take the courses in the US. Now, I also come down the side now that we're accepting online courses. I still want those students to take a course in the US in person and not, they're in Australia and they're taking a course online in the US. I don't know who's doing the work over there. Of course, I don't know who's doing it here either, but I really want them to be familiar with the US educational system, number one. And number two, depending on the country, they still have to come to the US anyway to take the MCAT. It's offered a number of countries, but not every country in the world. So they would have to come here anyway. Other questions?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, good. I'm sorry.
Is what services does Johns Hopkins have to offer for students with learning disabilities?
Great question. There's a link on our website. We do have services for students who need additional work. We found, probably a little late to the game, I'll be perfectly honest with you, a few years ago though, that there were students who came to Hopkins who were terrific students in college. It turns out they were receiving all kinds of services and they were afraid to tell us that. Now, I happen to have a JD, and one of the things I studied was the Disabilities Act. In fact, I was in law school long enough ago that I actually helped write some of the language, So we can't discriminate against people who have a documented disability. We can offer them assistance at any stage, even as applicants, if they want to talk to someone about what services are available. And we have a terrific woman, Ellen Kaplan, who runs that office, who works with students to make sure that they will succeed. It turns out there are more students who come to us having had issues, learning differences in some cases, or had no idea because they were so accustomed, so used to compensating. And then you get to medical school, and it's the volume of information that you're expected to process that they realize, I can't do this. Why? I'm not dumb. Or am I dumb? In some cases, they would ask themselves, when in fact they weren't. It's just that they had to learn a little differently than how they were accustomed to learning in secondary school and even in college in many cases. And Ellen's not a doctor, but she is just terrific. One of the reasons why we created her office is because we had a few students every year who weren't doing exceptionally well on the step one exam. Now it's pass-fail, of course, but when there were scores, some of the students, and we couldn't figure out why, and it turns out these were students who had undocumented learning differences. And so ever since then, our scores have not only done well, they typically are among the highest in the country. Although it's now pass-fail, but step two is not, it's CK and CS. So there's no problem.
Our next question is Hopkins Medical School receptive to non-traditional career change older applicants? And how many of these are accepted to the program? And do you have any advice to increase acceptance?
Yeah, look, we don't discriminate. Again, you're talking to someone with a legal education. You can be 12 years old and we'll take you if you've got all the qualifications. You can be well over my age, which, if someone wants to do it, God bless them. I mean, I'm in my mid 60s and I certainly can't imagine starting as a student ever again. But, let's be realistic when we're talking non-traditional. In many cases, for me, I'm talking about someone in their 30s. I always have to laugh to myself when someone who's 25 says they're non-traditional. The average age in medical school is 24. You're 1 year off of that. That doesn't make you non-traditional. But if you've been doing something totally unrelated, gone back and you've done well and you're 36 years old, I have no problems. You're older than that. As long as you have the clinical experience, you've got the the demonstrated commitment to patient care. Maybe you even have branched out into doing a little bit of research, and you certainly have the academics nailed. Then why shouldn't you be given a fair chance? 54% of our students in a given year will have graduated some year other than the year when they'll enter us in the year other than their graduation year. So that could be just 1 year off, right? But for some of them, it is 3 or 4 or 5 years. It really is. So our age range, I didn't bring up the report here with me. I'm not in my office actually, but our age range is anywhere from, it can be, believe it or not, 19 to 37. And some years it's higher than that. Not too many. When I first came to the medical school 22 years ago, there was a terrific doctor, oncologist, and he was totally non-traditional. And there's something about the non-traditional non-traditional physicians that really resonates with patients, because they're the empathy that they demonstrate as someone who's gone through life, maybe done something totally different, but brings that with them. Sometimes they have a family, not always. Sometimes they have a family, and that also gives them empathy and relatability. And so that's what we like when we see the non-traditional students who want to get the degree. I think it's fantastic. I really do. But you gotta have the energy. And I've seen students, this hasn't come up, but you all are going to be blown away, but I've seen students who've had 3, 4 kids in medical school. And I'm like, what? But I remember talking to one of the students. She'd actually done her post-bac at Mills College in Oakland. This is a number of years ago. And she was just a terrific student. She had gone to college out east, but went to Mills for her post-bac. And I think she had her 3rd child while she was at the medical school. And she said 2 things made it possible. One, a really supportive mate, a partner, and the other thing was she knew the type of residency she would be doing. She would hardly ever see or have time to have kids and step back and have a family. So she said she talked to some residents who said, this is the best time to have your kids. I wish I'd done it while I was a medical student. So was she non-traditional coming in? Because she probably was 2 years out of college when she applied to us. No, but she certainly was non-traditional while she was at the medical school. We're having a session for our admitted students on meeting your partner at the medical school, because a lot of students do. Your life partner.
The next question that we have is, does Johns Hopkins view primary caregiving of a loved one as clinical experience?
Yes and no. And the reason why I say that, because it's hard to really codify that, right? Or quantify that, because MCAT sort of asks you on the application, some people wildly exaggerate, some wildly underestimate how much time they're giving. But what are you getting from that? When you're caring for a loved one, you're learning about empathy, you're learning about the impact of medicine, of disease, of their interactions with their medical team, perhaps. So I think it's a great way. I don't wish it on anyone, but if it's something that has happened, and we see it all the time. I mean, some of the most powerful essays I've read are people who are working with someone who worked with someone, a member of the family, who has been very ill, sometimes deathly ill, and fatal illness and so forth. And they have been working with them initially as children, and then years later, fast forward 7 years later, they're taking over their medical care as a high school student and college student. So those people can really speak to what they learned from their relatives' illness and eventually, in some cases, demise, and really I mean, again, it comes back to empathy too.
Another question asks, what are your views on virtual shadowing? And how necessary is it to have a lot of in-person shadowing hours if you've already had a lot of clinical experience in one field?
You know, we don't require shadowing, all right? I've never said that. I said clinical experience. And I said earlier, shadowing is a nice introduction. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to define whether or not it's virtual or in person, but it shouldn't end with shadowing. That's what I'm saying. And if you go straight into getting, you know, a position as a patient navigator or an EMS or something where you're actually engaged with patients and not just shadowing, that's great. I do not say, well, where's the shadowing? I never have shadowing to me is I hate to say this, don't hate me for saying it, but it's just too passive, you know, and we want people who are engaged and interact. But again, you know, it depends on where you are, because if you're a first year college student, maybe that's the only thing you can do, right? So it's fine. Don't let that be the sum of it. I get really irritated when I see that someone has had hundreds of hours of shadowing and just a little bit of actual clinical exposure. And that is something you have to indicate on the AMCAS application. They do segment it. They want to know about your shadowing. They want to know about your medical clinical exposure, experience, volunteer, and also paid positions.
And then our next question is, sorry, I'm scrolling down. We got some good amount of questions going.
Good.
I think the only thing that I would add is clinical experience and having a job means that you had to be certified, pass a test, go to
Yes.
an interview, have a job responsibility, have a boss that you answer to, work in a team, work with problems, solve problems, be evaluated, retraining.
But that's why I said earlier, you know, some people may require certification, you know. But we also understand that not everyone has an opportunity to have hundreds of hours because they are doing something else. That's the thing. That's part of the holistic review. If you didn't have this, what are you doing? That's what I want to know. If you're just sitting home eating bonbons or whatever, watching your favorite TV shows or playing your favorite console games, then that's not going to fly. And believe it or not, I've seen that where someone can't talk about anything because they haven't had no volunteer experience, no clinical experience, no research, and their CV is just pathetic.
Our next question is, who or how many people are on the review team for applicant admissions?
Well, it depends on the institution. We have 10, I don't know, it's supposed to be 12, but I'll say it's 10 people who review applications. When I say review, we call them the screeners. When your application, first of all, your application can be submitted as early as late May. We will not get it from AMCAS until the last Friday in June, once it's been verified. And they've only departed from that once in memory for me, and that was the first year of the pandemic. But typically the last Friday in June. We will let the dust settle, so to speak, to see how many come in, and a lot will come in that day. We don't look at those applications, but we wait 2 or 3 days and automatically then send those people an email saying, please complete our our secondary application. And then it comes in and it's a seamless application, maybe not to you all, but it is for us. So we see both the secondary and we see the AMCAS first and then the secondary, see your essays, your short essay questions, everything, letters of recommendation. And we don't review anything until your application is complete. So if you send your application to AMCAS in June or late May, but you haven't completed the AMCAS application, you won't get our secondary if it's not verified. Once it's been verified, we will get it. If you say, but I'm retaking the MCAT, which is fine, not until August, we won't read your application. until the scores come in September. We have a 7-month period, right? If I do my math right, July, August, September, October, November, December, January, and sometimes into February. So almost 8 months of reviewing applications. And we start inviting people to interview late August. So that's about 6 months into February, middle to the end of February, depending on the year. And we admit people December, end of January, and end of March in the initial go rounds, and then we'll use the wait list after May 1st. So it's a long process for you guys. It's long for us too, trust me. And I read almost 40% of all the applications myself, okay, for the MD program. But the way it's structured, everyone is being read by at least 2 people. And then if there's a conflict between the 2 reviewers, it's read by a 3rd person. Okay, oftentimes I'm the 3rd person, and I'm not even including that in the 2,000 that I review. And so I read a lot of the secondaries. And once we invite you to interview, then you have 2 interviewers. Now, we've been doing virtual interviews for the past 2 years. We certainly didn't do it in 2019 or 2020 because the pandemic really didn't hit until after we finished the season. But in 2021 and 2022, we've been doing virtual interviews. And I haven't decided yet if we're going to continue with those. I know some schools they think it's more equitable, and there's an argument that could certainly be made for that. But when the students are invited to interview, we give them the opportunity of interviewing anytime in the day. We know the Californians don't get up, not necessarily, I shouldn't say they're all, but we can interview as early as 9. That would be 6 for you all. So, we give you the option of choosing the time you want, 9, 10, 11, 1, 2, or 3. So, now some people say, I have a job and I'll take an early interview. Maybe they'll take a 10 o'clock interview, which is, 7 a.m. before they're going in, and they can get at least one of those interviews done and then may interview later on. But everyone has to be interviewed by 2 members of the committee, and the members of the committee, and I, can be one of them, and I did quite a few this year. It's a faculty member and always a medical student, so we have 2 interviews. We want them to tell us everything they can. They're all given training. We do implicit bias training. We, have speakers come in and talk about the discrimination that people have faced, which may reflect their MCAT scores and so forth. I mean, really, we're trying to give people the benefit. We truly are. And we have discussion all the time, and throw out scores and everything. I'm serious. It's like, this is not important. Look what their faculty have said. Look how well they're doing. Blah blah. It's just been terrific. The IAT movement is something that I don't know if you're familiar with. It was created by Harvard. We use the IAT as well, the implicit assessment test. Definitely look at that. I used it in Minnesota, and we're doing it here at Hopkins as well. And we have workshops at the start of each season. So we really try to help understand the student. And we ask general questions, and then we have Hopkins specific questions that every member has to ask you, okay? And those questions get at our values and at your values. So if you really listen, I think you'll understand, wow, this is exactly what I want to do. This kind of institution where I want to be. You get a sense of that then from those exams, okay? Those questions, excuse me. I hope I answered that for you. I know we don't have a lot of time left. I can't believe how it's flying. Goodness.
Our next question, as we kind of are wrapping things up, is there any quality work, research, et cetera, that would determine whether someone gets into Hopkins?
No, because you have the interviewers are, whatever, for whatever reason, we all have our own biases. I can tell you, if you interview with me, you're going to leave thinking, wait, when did we interview? Because I want it to be a conversation. Okay, I want you to be at your best, because obviously we already like you. That's why we invite you. And I want to be able to communicate to the full committee why this student should get in. I'm looking for confirmation of what I see in the application in front of me. So don't be any different. Okay, it's not the time to try to come across in a way that you weren't on paper. And some people don't rise to their application in the interview. Interesting, and we've discussed that as a committee. But I will tell you something. I have done thousands of interviews. If you think about it, I'm really going into my 40th year. I'm talking about both undergrad admissions, which was almost 18 years, and 22 years in medical schools, 22 years. And I've read a couple 100,000 applications, right? Probably, and essays, personal statements, essays, and everything. And I've interviewed thousands of people. I still remember some of my interviews. And one of my favorite interviews was probably about 16 years ago. I can't believe this. No, 17 years, gosh, time does fly. Because I talked to someone who had gone to a public institution. I don't think he started at state at a community college, but he's certainly gone to a public institution. And we talked and talked. I'm not the most scientific person, well, trust me. But I have some knowledge of lab work and having worked in an engineering company during summer jobs and so forth. So I can carry an interview. And I really enjoyed talking to this young man. And we admitted him, not just because of what I said, but the students also thought he was terrific, our student interview. And he decided to take a year off and did a Fulbright. And he left. While he was on his Fulbright, I actually left Hopkins because I was drafted, so to speak, recruited by another medical school for a few years. I do compliance things, among other things. And so when sometimes institutions will ask me to come work longer than a year or two with them, and I spent 5.5 years. And then I came back to Hopkins. And when I came back to Hopkins 10 years ago last month, I was astounded to see this person there who I'd interviewed. And I'm thinking, he should have graduated by now. He was on the faculty. And he was startled to see me, but he didn't say anything when we spoke. Well, then fast forward another 2 years, he got recruited to be chair of one of the major disciplines, specialties at another leading medical school. So he was leaving, an incredible young man. He came by my office and he said, I was so surprised when I saw you 2 years ago and you remembered me. I said, of course I remember you. I said, I couldn't figure out why you were here. And then, you said, I'm on the faculty. I'm like, oh, great. He said, you really took a chance. I said, no, I didn't. And that's what amazes me. Some of our best students are humble. Their humility comes through in the application and even in the interview. I'm not saying depress who you are, but if that's who you are and you're giving and you're thoughtful, be that person then. That resonates with the committee. Trust me, we love that. Okay. My former dean, you said, not everyone has to be bombastic. He's absolutely right. Some of the best people are low key and still deliver. And that's what we look for. So.
Another question is, could a June MCAT date reduce my chances of acceptance?
No, not at all. I don't pay any attention to that. Get your application in when it's ready. And if you take a June MCAT, if you take July, if you take August, even if you take September, your chances are just as great. Okay. We don't hold to dates like that. There are reasons why people can't take them until later. We understand that. And so we don't say, well, they're not that qualified if they had to take it later on. Some people, the same thing with individuals who say, I should get my application in as soon as possible. If there's an experience you're going to have this summer of your application year, wait to put that on your application. We don't accept updates. Not every medical school does. We accept them once you've been interviewed. Not everyone is interviewed. We only interview 10%, 12% of our applicants. So some people may need to write about their incredible research experience or their incredible clinical experience that they've had over the summer. Some are taking grades courses and they need the grades to just boost their GPA slightly over the summer. So I'd say wait until you can get those grades calculated into your MCAT. So if it comes in September, that's fine. The deadline is October 15th. Get it in by then, that's all.
And then one of our last questions, how does Hopkins view international short clinical experiences, like 2 to 3?
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Are you finished, madam? I didn't mean to. No, we don't expect to see that. We don't require it, we don't expect to see it. The AAMC came up with a paper a few years ago discouraging medical tourism. People who would go on these, oftentimes excursions where they had to pay, and we're doing some invasive things. Yeah, it's one thing to go as part of a group where you're distributing medical supplies. That's fine. We don't require that, but that's not going to give you an advantage necessarily if you haven't done anything back in South Central LA and here you are over in another area. I'm saying, oh, I've helped the people of whatever country, and here you've got people in your backyard you're not engaging with. Well, why is that? So we don't expect to see international travel, and we don't necessarily award international travel saying, oh, that person's special, because for some people it's a matter of economics too. Yeah, not everyone can afford to do that. I never got to travel until I was 37 years old, I think. Yeah, 37. Internationally, I mean.
The other thing is that if there's things you can't do in your backyard, it's not acceptable to go do it in a
well, I didn't want to say that, but
brown and black.
Yeah, I'm not gonna argue with
patience
that. Right?
To do it.
I'm not gonna argue with that. I think that's an excellent point, because I have definitely seen it from people who are at some of the top institutions and who come from some of the wealthiest suburbs, and they've never done anything in the backyard of where their institutions are located. And you can't make the case that I want to work with the underserved. Well, then get going. Yeah, start doing it now is what I feel like saying to them. Don't wait until you get to medical school. And I want people to recognize their privileges, because some of them have, and they haven't taken advantage of that. And when I say take advantage, we make good use of it. One of the things that stands out about our students, in addition to being great students and great researchers, they, for whatever reason, they come in droves when they're interested in public service. We attract people, and maybe we reward people, but we definitely see students who are committed to serving others. There's no question. Particularly if you're going to come to Baltimore and you act like you don't want to walk off campus, it's not a good fit. It's just not a good fit. Our students are engaged.
Our last question kind of touches on that topic. We have 2 students who are non-traditional. One is a nurse from Africa, and another one has had a substantial career in the legal profession as a translator. How would Hopkins view these students?
Why medicine? That's all. Mm-hmm. It has nothing to do with that. Why medicine? Why do you want to be a doctor? You see, it has to be at the core of our evaluation. Not just that, well, I did legal stuff or I was a nurse, but why do you want to be a physician? Why does that nurse want to take it to the next level? And I have a cousin who was a nurse and became an MD, okay? So trust me, to me, it matters. How can you answer that question? How can you convince us in the application, to the extent we want to invite you to an interview to further discuss that? So we can't give you points for having been a nurse. We can't give you points for having been a legal translator, except if those experiences have somehow influenced why you want to be a physician. I would hope that the nurse could actually talk about the things she couldn't do that she can probably do as a physician. Because there are some differences, obviously, and certainly for that person with a legal education. You need to be able to explain that, that's all. But the bottom line, though, is have you had clinical experiences? Have you done all those other things we look for? Some people have, some even gone beyond that by writing, doing research, and so forth. Okay. Well, you guys have been terrific. So, great questions.
Yeah, we have a couple more questions, and
Okay, I have a little more
if-
time.
Okay.
I have just a little more time.
So whenever you want to end it, just say you're out, drop the mic, and then.
Me and Barack, remember that President Obama dropped the mic and he was, okay.
Obama out.
Yeah, Obama out, right? I'm gonna say white out. But please.
The next question is clinical experience weighted the same for MD, PhD program, or does it matter if you have much more research experience?
It matters if you have much more research experience. You have to have some clinical, but that's why it's called the MD and not just the PhD. But I don't want to say it's the 80-20 in reverse, where 80% might be clinical and 20% research. But it certainly has to, students who are going into the MD, PhD are committing, as I said, 8 years of their lives to being a student before they're even out there. So they have to have demonstrated the reasons why an MD might be important to them, but they are really much more PhD focused, but we make sure they have experience. And it's funded by the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, as not all MD PhD programs are, but all MSTP, it's alphabet soup, the Medical Science Training Program, which we have one of the largest ones for MD PhDs. That is funded because they want you to be a physician scientist. Okay, so you have to keep in mind the scientist is really important. That's the reason why you have to have that significant research experience for MD PhD. But, Mariah, I have to say, like I said, 97, 99% of our students come in having had research, 100% will come in or will graduate with research. All of our students, because they think, this is great, I'm taking advantage of these wonderful facilities and these wonderful mentors. And nearly 100% of our students have a peer-reviewed publication by the time they graduate.
And then our next question is, if we used AP credits to place out of certain classes, could we use higher level courses to fill those pre-med requirements?
Well, yes. Yeah. And in fact, I didn't go into that, but if you have AP credit, we still, for biology, for instance, we wanted to see an advanced biological science course taken at the college, not in the high school. Okay. So same thing with AP chemistry. We want to see 2 semesters, for instance, of organic chemistry, or 2 semesters of biochemistry, or an additional semester of quantitative or physical or analytical chemistry.
The next question is on the issue to clinical shadowing and volunteering. How many hours do typical matriculants have?
I don't want to get into that because it's not a checkoff or a checklist. Yeah.
And then how will submitting a late application to Hopkins hurt someone's chances to get accepted?
Well, you mean after the deadline? They won't get accepted. We don't accept applications after the deadline. I'm pretty firm about that. This shouldn't be something you just decided at the last second. Oh, I think I'll apply. Those are the worst applicants. So why even accept the application? If you're talking about submitting it later in the season, that's not late. The deadline is October 15th for the primary, the MCAT application, and November 1st for the secondary. That's, you get it in by then, you're not late.
Another question is, can you submit more than 3 letters of recommendation?
You can. I personally will not read more than 3 because we require 2 in the sciences and 1 non-science. Other members of the committee may feel differently. That's on them. If you send in 10 letters, I will read the 3 that fit the bill in the first order. And they may not be the ones you think are your strongest, but we only ask for 3 letters. And that's because that's all we need to get a sense of who you are. Enough to get you to the interview stage. After the interview, you can update your application with additional letters, but we find that 3 letters is more than adequate. Now, some students are at colleges that have committee letters. UCLA does not have one. Stanford doesn't have one, but so you have to get the individual letters. But there are plenty of schools that still have the committee letter. I find those letters are far more helpful because the advisors will interview you and ask you to fill out all kinds of information, and they will introduce that in the committee letter that they submit to us. Now, sometimes they will append other letters with the committee letter, but we really do want the committee letter if it's required, if your school has a committee letter. If they don't, then it has to be 3 letters, 2 science faculty and 1 non-science. And I often get asked the question, well, I'm an engineering major, can I just send in 2 science letters? You can, but you're going to be studying the life or natural sciences. I want to hear how you did in courses that related to it. Now, obviously someone who's BME biomedical engineering is pretty darn close to someone who's a biology major. And I will accept those courses as well as a letter of recommendation from them. But I really like to see someone outside of that. And in terms of the non-sciences, they have to be from individuals who taught you in a non-science, humanities, social, and or behavioral science. I do not want a letter from a doctor. I do not want a letter from an employer. Only if you've graduated from college and you've been working for a year, then you can supplement your application with a employer's letter, someone who supervised your work. Only if you've been in graduate school can you supplement those other letters with your graduate supervisor. Advisor, not supervisor, advisor.
The next question is it okay for the letters of recommendation are dated for 2021 if you are applying this cycle?
Sure. Yeah, I don't particularly care. I don't pay attention to when they're dated. I just want to make sure they're signed. Okay, with some schools have different policies. So for Hopkins, I don't dwell on that. Now, if you're a reapplicant, my advice is to get a new letter because it didn't work the first time, did it? So.
And our last question is, when would be a good time to start working in clinical experience?
Depends on where you are in your education right now. If you're able to get those experiences as a first-year student in college, fine. It's you need to be able to write about it knowledgeably on the MCAT application. If you're applying at the end of your junior year, going into your senior year, then you can't talk about what you think you'll be doing, what you think you'll learn if you haven't done it. If you're like many students taking a year off because you haven't had that experience, wait until you've had some of it under your belt to be able to talk knowledgeably. Otherwise, we're really just evaluating you on your academics. And to me, it should be a combination of the academics and the clinical and so forth. Well, thank you all. I've really enjoyed meeting with you. Great questions, as I said. So.
Thank you again for making time, and thank you for staying extra
No problem.
to answer the last remaining.